Production is kind of the defense. People say we need to amp up the production now. Where do you stand on that?
I think in terms of specifically how you think about it, I don't know if I see it the same way some others do in terms of the right answer for every product might not be a warehouse in Southern California with a bunch of folks turning wrenches. It might be.
Mike Fiuk is the Vice President of Defense Strategy at Darkhive, a company dedicated to developing U.S.-produced autonomous robotic systems for defense and public safety.
They would talk about their specs and their drone and how it's flying and how it's great. What they wouldn't say are things like,
what would you say is like the thing that concerns you most about the new battle space?
I'm still thinking through this in many ways, but I don't know if that's the right lesson for us to draw. I think we need to think about, they're trying to be ready and they're trying to think about what does the future fight look like. And unfortunately, the answer today is,
this is the #1 defense podcast in America, so... Just quick intro for you. Tell me about how you got to this company, Darkhive, right now.
Sure. So Mike Fiuk, Vice President of Defense Strategy at Darkhive, as we talked about earlier, come from a military background originally. I was an Army officer for 6 years on active duty, still serve on the reserves, stationed over in Europe, spent some time in the Middle East, and then rounded out my time here in the States. After that, pretty traditional path for a lot of vets, went business school and then went the consulting route with Boston Consulting Group, did some work in the private equity space, and then spent a lot of time working with public sector clients on large projects. After that, got the founder bug, had been involved in the kind of Web3 blockchain space for a while. So co-founded a company that was building a vertical talent marketplace focused on that industry, worked for a larger startup in the space. And then about a year ago, really started feeling kind of the calling to come back home, as it were, in terms of everything going on in the world, in terms of the kind of activity we're seeing in the defense tech space. So started having some conversations, knew I wanted to come back into the space, and connected with John Goodson, CEO and co-founder at Darkhive, and then had a really great conversation.
How'd you know him?
So cold outreach. Cold outreach.
Love
Yeah.
that.
Was talking to a number of folks in the space. There's a lot of big names, a lot of excitement. But what spoke to me when John and I connected was a focus on kind of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that spoke to me. There was a fit on the team and joined the team as Vice President of Defense Strategy. So a bit of an ambiguous title as titles go. So kind of run the revenue side of the organization, business development, sales, strategy, that side of the house.
And now you find yourself at my table.
Very much so.
This is the #1 defense podcast in America, so congrats.
I saw that on a previous episode. I also think I heard you guys are doing fact checking, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know if that's one that gets put on the list to fact check.
We can fact check it. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of competition, to be honest, but we'll have the...
We'll go with it.
We'll have the data science team fact check it. You know, as the #1 defense podcast, I have to say at the top that this episode is sponsored by Prism. Prism is the #1 CRM and analytics platform for go-to-market teams in the defense industry.
Ah, okay. So
Yeah.
I think I heard that on a previous episode too, where there was discussion about that, and it sounds like that might have...
Yeah. Well, actually, it's not sponsored by Prism. And full disclosure, this is actually the funny part, is that when I first mentioned them, Scott Sanders, who's CRO, I don't know if you ever met Scott, Forterra. He's a former Marine.
I was listening to that episode on the drive over.
So I actually didn't know this when their company uses Prism. And we were just talking about it. And so then I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Maybe our company should use it. And then I started shilling it, basically.
Yep.
And I know nothing about it at the time. And then apparently, so the founder was here yesterday of Prism. And I learned after that episode that I'm actually an investor in Prism, which is hilarious, through a fund. Like, I'm an LP in a fund that's invested in it. And so then I was like, I should probably disclose that. So this is the disclosure for the listeners. No,
Matt and Justin and the team are great. They're fantastic. I really like the product they've built. Definitely there's a gap there in the market.
Oh, wait, so you're using it?
We're in discussions with them. You know, we may be kicking off a pilot here soon to kind of get a feel for the product and see if it's a fit for what we're doing. But I mean, overall, there's a lot of folks that are trying to sell to government and sell to defense that may not come from this space, which is a good thing. But they need tools like Prism and others to help them understand, interpret, and figure out how do we connect all of these dots and get across the valley and all that good stuff.
All right. Well, make sure you pay enough money for it, because as an investor now, don't try to get too good of a deal,
Yeah.
Okay, so Darkhive. So the founder, what was his name again?
John Goodson and Steve Turner are the founders.
John and Steve. Yep. And are they electrical engineers? What's their background?
Yeah, so John comes from also from the military. He was a technician supporting a lot of the West Coast SEAL teams, so a lot of deployment experience, a lot of experience with drones, with small UAS, and as he likes to say, kind of their shortcomings. He's got a great blog post, Born in the Dirt, where he talks about the origin vision for Darkhive, the literal drone in the dirt not working, and then teams ceasing operations with drones and stopping to fly them because how ineffective they were at the time. And then Steve is the CTO and co-founder, and he's got deep technical background. And what always impresses me with Steve is his range, whether it's the hardware, whether it's some of our software products, where it's talking about ATO and containerization and all those things. He's got just an amazing kind of mind for that and vision for how he wants to build a company from the technical side.
Nice. Okay. Can we get what's like the product we should look up that Jack should Google?
Yeah. So I'll give you the
see one.
I'll give you the tagline is autonomous teaming for defense and public safety. That's me. That's probably not on the website yet, but that's how I think about it.
I just want to see a picture of like one of the products.
If you go to our website and look up the Obelisk, Obelisk.
There we go.
Perfect. Right there. So yeah, I mean, as you can see,
keep it up there at the top. Yeah. So this thing right here.
Exactly. So on the hardware side, two products kind of, openly live today. The Obelisk, which you see here, kind of a larger Group 1 UAS, autonomous ISR is kind of the key capability.
What's the wingspan on there, or like the blade, like the distance?
It's not very, so small, folded up. It kind of fits in your ruck. Multiple of them can fit. It folds up, and multiple can fit in your ruck. Can be deployed in 60 seconds or less. And it's really that, like I said at the top, kind of that autonomous teammate capability, right? Where a lot of drones today, like some of the ones we have on the table, you've got to be heads down, you've got to have the goggles on, you've got to fly them. This is, how do I deploy an asset that actually helps me generate combat power and deliver a real tactical effect or even a tactical task on the battlefield versus something that you've got to take someone else that's doing something else.
Yeah, give me an example.
Yeah, so we recently were working with an Army brigade commander we're going to go out and support and do some exercises with. And his kind of problem is, hey, listen, there's the Army took away the cavalry squadron, so the reconnaissance, surveillance, and target acquisition formation in the brigade was that Cav squadron, and that's gone away based on some changes in how the Army's doing business. And what that leaves is a gap in terms of exactly that. How do I go out and how do I understand the enemy situational template, where the enemy is, how their forces are arrayed? And today, a lot of
Thanks for defining that. Like my mom listened, she wouldn't know.
So on the drive over, when I was listening, you called someone else out on their acronym. So I'm like, all right, quickly, making sure I'm making it all my acronym.
Yeah, nice. Okay.
So it's, how do you then fill that gap? How do you deliver that capability so you understand how the enemy's arrayed and where their forces are without having to carve out a piece of your formation and say, hey, go and fly a bunch of these drones, take away from the other things you're doing, take away from the other skill set you have, and also do this.
So the Army brigade commander, this is like a problem they're having?
It's a problem they're having in terms of...
But like where? At war somewhere? Where are they?
So, I mean...
Or this is a perceived problem they might have?
As many things, luckily for us, there are still active conflicts we're involved in places like Africa and the Middle East. But a lot of this is folks thinking through those next set of challenges, that next fight.
They're trying to get ready.
They're trying to be ready, and they're trying to think about what does the future fight look like. And unfortunately, the answer today is we'll take an infantryman or a scout or someone else, put goggles on them, train them how to fly a drone, and go out and perform that ISR mission versus something like the Obelisk, which is you set it up, you plan your mission, you hit go, and not only does it execute its mission autonomously, but it reports back to you over a mission command platform you're already using. Here are the objects of interest, here are the potential targets, etc.
Now, one of the things I was curious about on this autonomous mission set, can it just wait to report back? Just basically collect it all and then come back and then you can download it? Or do you real time send it?
Great question.
Does it do both?
Yeah, I don't know if you've been reading some of our materials and our internal notes, because exactly the stuff we're talking about. So the vision is, to your point. I
actually do no prep, so but
you're spot on. Yeah, you're spot on.
Okay.
So it does both, right? Because there are situations where you want that kind of more live video style feed or the kind of at the moment update. And in an EMI, electromagnetic interference, or this is acronym city here, or DDIL, degraded, disrupted, intermittent communications type of environment, you want to not have that constant RF signature. You want to not constantly
that makes
broadcast.
Sense.
So it has an MCON, a mission control mode, where either at designated waypoints or when it observes a certain type of object, it then only reports back. So it's not this constant emitting signal on the battlefield that, hey, not only is there a drone here, but oh, by the way, here's the GCS it's talking to. There's probably someone here you're interested in if you're a threat force.
Okay, cool. And then on this, so on Obelisk here, do you know, why'd you call it that?
That's actually a good question. I don't know if I have the full context on the name. Yeah, I think on the kind of mythology spectrum, you've got your Andurils, your Palantirs,
Can you pull up Obelisk, the Greek? Is it Greek mythology?
So I don't know if it's that. I know some of our verbiage comes from actually StarCraft. So it's more the video game ecosystem than the mythology.
We're big StarCraft people at ACS too.
Oh, so Red Queen is one of our products.
Nice.
Named from that world. So
got to do Overlord.
That's a good one too. Yeah,
I think the Overlord drop. They've got to drop the Hydras.
We were talking about, in defense, that kind of like the Hawaiian shirts versus the other outfits. I think that's another one where like, are you from like the Tolkien kind of mythology? Are you like Norse mythology? Like, what's your naming convention?
Yeah.
Where do you pick that from?
Did you play any StarCraft?
Not StarCraft. I played a lot of other video games growing up. I was a big RuneScape guy. I know that's really, I see Jack nodding his head there. Maybe there's some other folks in the room that play that. And like the Age of Empires kind of series of games.
Okay.
Big, not so much anymore. Don't have the time, but it was a big gamer growing up.
I used to watch a lot of professional StarCraft, and I used to play a good amount as a kid. And there's this one video. We're not gonna be able to find it, Jack, so don't pull it up. But it was just like this guy talking about strategy, and he's like, it's a Chinese guy. He's like, you make the mutas, I make the Goliaths, I win. The mutalisks are like the Zerg flying creatures. And then the Goliaths are like the autonomous battle tanks that drive around. That like walk around on 2 feet. They crush the mutas.
I never had the kind of like actions per second needed for that, but Age of Empires is very similar. Where someone's like, I'm going to go Franks and have a bunch of knights, and someone is going to do spearmen to counter that and all of that. So
I fear that our hopefully Autonomy wins out, because I fear that the actions per minute game in the US, we're not good at it, like compared to the Asian countries. Like they'll just crush us if it comes down to actions per minute in a real war. Like, I mean, think about it. They're doing like 180 actions per minute, or like, an average American like gamer is doing like 110.
Things like Dota and other games, League of Legends. Yeah, it's different. Yeah. I'm nowhere near that level, but I did play a lot of games growing up.
I was a big League of Legends guy.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. I used to love that game.
Were you competitive? What was your?
I was competitive in like the first 2 years it came out. Like back when it was like, if you ever followed it, like TSM was one of the big company, or it became a big company before TSM. Reginald, they didn't have it named yet. Like I was playing with those guys back then before they named their brand.
Okay.
Like in the first 2 years of the game, that was horrible. Like,
were you, because there's leagues, right? There's like a ranking system.
Yeah, this was pre all of that.
Oh,
like
wow,
I was like, this was like when I was in the Navy. This was like I was an ensign.
Mm-hmm.
It was 2008, and the game was just like in beta, and we were playing with like Hotshot GG and all these guys, like all these like famous old school players that later went on to like run the companies.
Gotcha.
Of behind the teams,
like the 100 Thieves of the world. Those
what was the one? Not TSM, CLG.
Yep.
CLG. Like before they became CLG, they just were like a bunch of friends, and like the guy Hotshot GG was his like handle. Like I was like playing with those guys, but like I was the worst. Yeah. Like,
but you were early.
Yeah.
And now you've got that some content you can use in your future media business, like we were talking about.
Exactly. So, okay, what about these brushless motors? Where do you get those from?
So kind of on the manufacturing supply chain side, it's another good question. The way we think about it, primarily 2 ways. One, you've got to be compliant. So that's NDA compliance, and that's DIU has a great program, the Blue UAS list, which they're doing a refresh of that, and we're excited about that opportunity to get on the list there. And then the other piece is, how do you build a resilient and redundant supply chain? So it's sourcing parts compliantly, and then also thinking about where you're doing your manufacturing. And that can be friendshore, that can be nearshore, that can be onshore here in the US. But fundamentally, it's a world where if there are geopolitical tensions, if there are supply chains in places like Southeast Asia that are compromised, how do you build a redundant, resilient supply chain with their motors and other components that when you need them most, which is in a situation like that, you're not then stuck and you're not able to provide, let's say, a battery for your system or something like that.
But like, where does the one on the web, where does that one from?
So I'm not going to break down your specific countries of origin and components, but they're all compliantly sourced. And for kind of across the product, they're typically in a redundant fashion where there's one compliant vendor and there's also another one. So if there are those tensions, those challenges, it's not
that makes sense.
Hey, we can only give you one component with the system because we can't source anymore.
Every drone needs 4 brushless motors, right?
Well, if you're a quad.
Yeah,
if you're a quad. I think there's some other designs out there, some other folks going other ways, but I think we can just talk about it. We've seen it in the market recently with Skydio and others where the supply chain is really causing issues for them. And that's something we want to think through ahead of time, again, to not be surprised when you need them most when, oh, by the way, your supply chains are most likely to be compromised in some way.
Supply chains are tough. I mean, we deal with it too. Obviously, the same problem with our gun turrets. Like, just where can we get this stuff from? It's
a 240, the sensors, optics, all the other stuff that comes together, and then the kind of vehicle itself. Like, what parts, I guess, are the most challenging for you guys?
I would say our motor vendors, their supply chain. So like we have like a giant motor on the side of it, if you see the Bullfrog, and there's actually like 2 big motors really. And so the subcomponents of those which aren't really we're buying the motors,
which have some components.
But those vendors are U.S. vendors that then have supply chains.
Yep.
And so it's really the challenge of their supply chains, not mine directly, but obviously it affects us.
It can be your problem.
It is my problem. I mean, it is my problem. Basically, I was on a call with one of the vendors the other day, and their longest lead item is like these magnets that go in the motors. And so we're like, well, can we just pre-buy these magnets and just like store them in your facility, basically, so that when we want to buy motors, like you'll have the subcomponents.
Sure.
So we're just trying to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which the vendors are amenable to. It's obviously kind of annoying for the vendors to like have to deal with some random startups, like small supply chain.
Yeah.
But I promise them that we'll be big, and I think we will be. But it's hard to know.
I mean, I think that's exactly the type of work Michael Jernigan on our team, he heads up manufacturing supply chain, he's doing, and it's so critical, right? Because these are the things. It's not as exciting as a capability demonstration. It's not as exciting as a kind of sizzle reel highlight video, but that's what's critical, because in a time of crisis, if there's geopolitical constraints, that's what's going to be compromised. And I think we've already seen aggressive threat actors taking steps, along those lines. So
obviously production is kind of the defense and in many ways. And we need to people say we need to amp up the production now. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, highest level defense industrial base is a hot topic for a reason. I think it's critical that we as a country and us as the West, NATO plus allies and partners, have the capability to manufacture and produce these at the scale needed to fight and win. Like we talked about earlier, right, that having the strongest capability makes you the least likely to use it, and that's a good thing. So I think incentives are fully aligned that we need to have that capability. I think in terms of specifically how you think about it, I don't know if I see it the same way some others do, in terms of the right answer for every product might not be a warehouse in Southern California with a bunch of folks turning wrenches. It might be leveraging world-class global supply chain, contract manufacturing, EMS partners that can deliver quality product at scale.
That's kind of where I'm kind of in that camp, the second camp. Like I think that, obviously I do want to reindustrialize. I want to bring jobs back here, but there are important global supply chains or allies of things that are already built out and scaled that we should leverage. And It's be a lot cheaper than, trying to make a whole new bring back Detroit, for example.
So, I mean, as a great of event as that was, and I know a lot of folks are excited, I think I see it the same way, where how can we be resilient? How can we not just have one supply chain, but multiple ways to manufacture a product or a key component? And I think it is finding that right balance of, there are geographies we probably don't want supply chains or manufacturing facilities in, but there are plenty of friendly geographies. There are plenty of nearshore geographies that are closer to the U.S. where we don't have to worry about interrupted supply chains or linkage between the two. And then there's, some things will make sense to manufacture in the States at scale, or have a mixture of those three options.
And then switching gears slightly, are you considered, so your company's in Boston?
So our company is based in San Antonio, Texas. Most of the team is there. I'm up in Boston myself.
You're in Boston.
Some of the team is remote and hybrid. And on the kind of business side, it's less critical that we're in the HQ in San Antonio every day, but a lot of the technical team and a lot of the org is there.
Yeah, I used to go to San Antonio a lot in the last couple of years. My sister was the head of the recruiting command there for the Navy.
Oh, fantastic.
She just left. Now she's teaching at the War College. She's a commander. So it's almost her 20th year.
Oh, amazing.
Big sister.
Amazing.
Yeah, we're a military family.
That's fantastic.
My dad was enlisted in the Navy, and my dad's dad was in the Army.
Oh, so all Navy, but it sounds like your grandpa was in the Army?
My grandpa was in the Army, yeah.
Okay.
Supply colonel.
Fantastic.
Yeah, back when the Army used to have the Presidio. The Presidio in San Francisco.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, it used to be like an Army base.
Yeah.
And now they sold it back to the city, and now a bunch of venture capitalists live there.
I was going to say,
which is funny. It used to be like an Army barracks.
Yep.
And stuff. And it's a beautiful place, the Presidio. Actually, Founders Fund is there.
Okay.
That actually reminds me of I want to bring up that Trae Stevens, bring up this tweet. This is actually relevant to you. I want to get your take on this since you're doing ISR.
Sure.
All right. So doing some email deal flow triage during a long plane ride, just opened 3 consecutive decks for companies building group 1 to 3 ISR drones for defense with dual use in industrials. Why are you all starting the same company? All right. This is a good one for you to give your differentiation on the podcast. Why Darkhive is better and different.
Yeah, sure. No, I think it's a good question. It's certainly a lot of players trying to build, which at some level, selfishly, I'm still a reservist. I want there to be competition. I want there to be, the best products created and have those win. I think to this specific question, a couple of things. One, there's a lot of companies that are building they're building a drone that flies really well and does great things from like a drone enthusiast perspective. So flight time, going through a course, those kind of all those videos we've seen. I think what there's less of, and this is, I mentioned it earlier, the way I think about it is that's great. That's a piece of hardware. What an Army commander, a Marine MU, Marine Expeditionary Unit commander cares about, or someone in the Air Force and the TACP community, what capability can that deliver? What actual tactical mission task is that achieving? What effect on the battlefield is it having? And I think that's a differentiator where I imagine if Trae picked up the phone or got an email and asked those founders, they would talk about their specs and their drone and how it's flying and how it's great. What they wouldn't say are things like, okay, you can actually, the same way today you have a screen line that you employ a man formation for, Bradleys, Strikers, dismounted scouts, etc. You can achieve that same tactical mission task of a screen using an autonomous ISR asset like the Obelisk, picks up, goes and flies, covers the same amount of terrain. And then, oh, by the way, instead of a person, a man or a woman, having to comb through all of that data and look at all of those feeds and figure out what's important, it can push back to you over your mission command platform. Here's a T-72 we might have spotted. Here's a piece of the road that looks like it's degraded, so now it's not trafficable. So there's all of these things that same effect that you can generate, you can do with autonomous teaming. And I think that's the differentiation where there's many drone companies. I've seen relatively few that have a crisp articulation of what is the effect they generate for the supported commander, for the soldiers out in the field.
Okay, so I have a couple of follow-ups there. Autonomous teaming. Let's focus on that phrase.
Yep.
Said it a couple of times. One more time, what does that mean?
So the fundamental way I think about it is, again, today, if I picked up one, DJI drone and tried to use it, someone's got to put on goggles, someone's got to fly it and not do something else that the Army, the Marine Corps, the Air Force has trained them to and fly the drone. The autonomous teammate is I can leverage an autonomous system to do something. I can give them a task, a purpose, a mission set the same way I would a manned element or frankly a person today. And that's the difference. That it's an actual,
makes sense.
If you have a 10-person squad, it's as if you had an 11th team member because you can task them, they can go do something. It might be autonomous ISR, which we've talked about. It might be comms node in placement where the Obelisk has a modular payload. You put the right comms node on there, it goes, it flies, it hangs itself in a tree, it puts itself on the right terrain feature, and all of a sudden you've got a resilient, localized comms mesh network that's much more difficult to disrupt from a threat perspective. So it's things like that where today I would have to task a person to go do it. I can leverage an autonomous teammate to go do it.
Okay. And then one of the differentiators, it sounds like you said, is besides just the collection, it's then the processing and analysis, right, on the back end.
So so we're integrated into the tactical awareness kit, the TAC or the ATAC ecosystem. So that's the Android devices, the kind of mission command software that a lot of folks have been using, came out of the Air Force originally. And to be frank, when I was leaving active duty, it still hadn't really penetrated the Army as deeply, but now folks are getting there on the Army side as well. And so we're directly integrated there. So when you plan the route and say, hey, go follow this route, look at these areas of the battle space, you can do that directly via the UAS tool, which is an app, a plugin in the TAC ecosystem. You can do it directly off of your Android device. And then when you get here's an object, here's the grid, here's the description, because there's an automatic recognition model on board that tells you what you think it is. Oh, it looks like an APC. Oh, it looks like a wheeled vehicle. That pushes to you directly over TAC. So what we're trying to get away from is the old JOCs, the Joint Operations Centers in the Middle East where you go in and they've got 100 screens. That doesn't scale well. There's a limit to that, and kind of in a more force-on-force conflict, high-intensity conflict, that's just not tenable. So what we're trying to do is how do you not only provide this capability, but help folks distill down to what's most important. And again, that's based on the task that you've set, and then it gives you just that information you need on the mission command platform you're already using. So it's integrated into the workflow. It's not a disruption. It's not, I have a 10-person team. Now we have the capability a 12-person team would. It's not, I have a 10-person team. Now three of them have to go and fly drones. Have actually lost combat power. We're trying to help people build combat.
And do you know about the DIU Blue List or whatever it's called?
Sure.
Are you guys on that?
Or
what is it, by the way?
Yeah, sure. So DIU Defense Innovation Unit.
Yeah.
Hitting all our acronyms today. Yeah. Basically, they're putting together a list that, to our conversation on supply chain and components and subcomponents, does a look through of the BOM or the bill of materials of a lot of this hardware and says, okay, is it not only compliant from an NDA perspective and others, but is it compliant from the components and the subcomponents? It's basically DIU Blue saying it's compliant manufactured, the components are compliantly sourced. So there's not something in there that's actually from a geography we don't want it to be, let's say. I think it's a really helpful tool. A lot of defense folks we talk to, that's one of the first questions they ask. That's also one of the places.
Okay, I didn't know that.
So it's also one of the places where if you're a unit that might have some unit level funds, or if you're leveraging an OTA, kind of a non-programmatic kind of purchasing process or procurement process, it's an easy way for folks to think about, okay, of the universe of UAS, here's some that DIU trusted organization has said, meet these standards. And I can't go into too much detail, but there is a DIU refresh process where they invited a number of performers out to 29 Palms in California to fly and kind of show their capabilities. So excited to see the next version of the list.
I saw someone make a post on LinkedIn about it, kind of mad about it. They were like, there's 400 and now there's only 30 and they're not helping competition. And I don't know. I read that last night and I was like, this is interesting to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to speak for DIU, but what I have seen is that it sounds like they're thinking about it more in terms of an iterative process. So it's not this open and shut door, like there's one refresh and that's it. And I think that's what a lot of industry would look towards is okay, let us understand the gates, the standards we have to hit, and then can we make this more of a rolling process? So totally understand the frustration. And again, just what I've read, I think DIU is thinking about it more in terms of it's not a one and done. It's a let's establish this and kind of build it over time.
That makes sense. Yeah. I'm still learning. My job in the Navy was I wasn't like in the innovation, like the nuclear Navy, naval reactors. Like we were kind of in our own little bubble. Sure. So now that I'm like, I don't know, 13, 14 years later, like selling back into the government and like on the other side of it, it's just like the whole world's totally different than when I was 21. Like there's innovation units, there's like Army application labs, like there's just all these different, like not what I wouldn't call like end users, but there's like these, like tech innovation centers, more than just the DIU. There's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And just I think it's tough for like founders and startup people to make sense of like which ones to talk to, how to navigate all of this, like how do they interface with the end users? What would be your advice for startups, like not companies like ours that are like a little bigger, like a 30 plus people, but like the 10 person or 5 person that just want to like get into this and bring a new innovation? Like what would be your advice to them?
Yeah, sure. No, it's a great question. I'll caveat and frame up front that like I certainly don't have all the answers. I always say no one really has all the answers.
We don't have them. I'm just curious, like what your thoughts are.
There's a reason it's the valley of death for a reason. It's the frozen middle for a reason. What I would say are a couple of things. One, I think the framework I use is it's a little bit different sales motion than even like your B2B in general in the private sector, even like your enterprise B2B. What you need to think about are a couple of things. One, who are your end users? To your point, those are different than your economic buyers. They're forward, they're the right operational units. And that's kind of multi-threaded in and of itself, that there's the literal end user it might be an Air Force TACP, JTAC that deploys one of our systems. It's also that unit, that 06, that colonel that's at that command that needs to be a champion and advocate. Then you've got your economic buyers. So historically, this has been your program offices. So, your PM insert capability area, your PMA on the Navy Marine Corps side, AFL, CMC, and other folks like that. And then you also need to cultivate these champions and these stakeholders. And that's a very ambiguous bucket, but I'm a big believer that you also need to find the right, typically more senior, in the right positions that can help advocate for, or even just create awareness of your capability, because there are primes that are deeply entrenched. There are, contracts and vehicles and hardware that has been procured for a long time. So that's how I think about a high level. Like those are the 3 type of folks you need. And if you build this matrix, and I was actually doing this recently, of all of your products are all the capabilities you're trying to deliver, and those are your rows, and then your columns are these 3 areas, and think about who you're reaching out to where. And then in the early days, if you're a 5-person team, it's the ground game. So you've got to get out. You got to meet that person in that brigade that's going to use your technology. You've got to go to that ASOS Air Support Operations Squadron that a lot of the TACP, JTAC community reside in. You've got to meet those folks. You got to talk to them and understand their problems and their needs. And in the early days, I think that's the difficult work a lot of teams don't want to do.
It's fun to just sit in the shop and build,
It's fun to sit in the shop and build. It's also, it can be easier because of the great work the DIUs of the world, the AFWorkses of the world have done to get into some of these innovation cells and organizations, which are great and they add a lot of value. But I think some folks either just don't know they need to do it, or it's more difficult to then go out and put in the hours, jump on a plane and go to Huntsville, Alabama, or 29 Palms, or over to Europe, or on island in Hawaii, or to the Korean Peninsula, and talk to folks where they are and understand their problems. And I think that's a lot of the work folks need to put in to break through the noise and highlight their capability, and ultimately have the opportunity to sell to government.
What would you say is like the thing that concerns you most about the new battle space?
The thing that concerns me most, I think there's 2 that stick out. One, there's a lot of attention and interest in the conflict in Ukraine, and obviously, unfortunate that the Ukrainian people have to go through that, and glad we can support our allies and partners the ways we can over there. But given that attention and interest, I think there's a lot of lessons that are being drawn that from a practicality perspective, from a need perspective, have become TTPs and how folks fight in Ukraine that may or may not translate as cleanly into how the U.S. fights, how NATO fights, and how other kind of Western powers fight. So I think that's a concern of mine: is are we learning some of the wrong lessons? And then the second one that concerns me is thinking through the scale we need to win. So going from exquisite to attritable is, kind of many folks have used that buzzword and that expression. I don't think people actually rationalize and understand what that means. Let me give you an example. Some of the UAS platforms, some of the larger ones, we're becoming attritable now. It's cheaper. So instead of a multi-million-dollar, fixed wing, something more like a Shadow or even a Reaper or something along those lines, you have a $250,000 UAS you use. That's not very attritable. As I'm sure you think through sitting on the side of the equation Allen Control Systems does, you can put effects on that and remove that from the battlefield, and that's still kind of a large investment to be taken off the battlefield. When we talk attritable, the way I like to think about it is, how do you build a UAS that costs about the same as an Army, a 155 round, a big bullet, as we used to call them in the artillery community? Because that the Army expends, and commanders are actually happy to do it. It's not even that we're okay with it being attritted. An Army commander wants to fire more big bullets because that creates an effect and that allows them to maneuver and close with the enemy and achieve the mission they need to. So long answer, but I think those are the two ways to think about it. Are we learning the wrong lessons from Ukraine? And then do we understand how we actually get to attritable and being able to build the scale at the scale needed to win? And that's a price point perspective. That's a supply chain perspective to our discussion. And that's really understanding what that future fight may look like. And again, the way we can assure we never have to be in that future fight is have the credible capability to deliver and win if we're ever called to.
Yeah, I think there's a pretty stark difference between the two conflicts, like Israel and Iran and the Ukraine Russia, because like in Ukraine Russia, it's like a lot of smaller, more attritable systems, and then in Iran is just kind of like lobbing big Group 3s over hundreds of miles. Mm-hmm. It's like a much different style of conflict.
Yeah, no, I think and that's part of what I'm trying to unpack with Ukraine, and I'm still thinking through this in many ways, but the way there's hey, we've got a small quad we put together, it costs a couple $100, and then someone sits there with goggles and they can fly one and then they fly another, and it achieves a great effect for the type of conflict they're in, the more kind of trench line based, the more kind of fixed lines of engagement. I don't know if that's the right lesson for us to draw. I think we need to think about, what does it look like if an Army brigade combat team has the ability to deploy 500 UAS at once? And the same way, this is going to get very doctrinal here, but the Army goes to do a breach, right? So there's an obstacle. There's a doctrine, SOSRA, suppress, obscure, reduce, and kind of basically removing the obstacle and allowing the force to pass through it. There's a very doctrinal approach to the suppression, the number of HE rounds that mortars, artillery are putting out to create an effect on the enemy. They're go down in their foxhole, they're not looking at the obstacle. Then there's obscuration. So how do we use smoke and other effects so the enemy can't see us going up to the obstacle? And then we reduce it with the engineers and the sappers and what they do, and we can continue to move through the obstacle. I think that's part of what we're trying to unlock is, what's the next version of that for the next fight, where it's not SOSRA, but it's also, okay, if we're going to go and do a movement to contact, where we're going to move down an axis of advance and we expect at some point to come in contact with the enemy, what's the UAS formation ahead of that? What's the autonomous teammate ahead of that? Whereas General Rainey says there's no blood on first contact. It's not only do we not care if 20 of these drones get shot down, it's almost a good thing, because then we know, okay, the enemy's clearly here. If they're putting effects on us with what we assess to be, a crew-served weapon or some other direct fire weapon system, we now have a better understanding of the enemy sit temp. Let's put even more UAS, more autonomous teammates in that area. Now we understand, okay, they're in this position, they're disposed in a certain way, they've got certain types of vehicles in that area. So I think that's the kind of shift a lot of folks are trying to think through, is how do you get to that next version of the fight?
I like to call it, I say, how does maneuver warfare change in the age of drones?
And I think that's exactly it. It's autonomous teammates being put places so we can achieve no blood on first contact.
Yeah. And where do you see in traditional maneuver warfare, there's obviously tanks had a big role. Where do you see them fitting in?
There's a saying, the death of the tank has been called for since the birth of the tank, basically.
Exactly, yeah.
So I'm not a believer in that the MBT, the main battle tank, is ever going to fully go away. I do think they're going to have to change and evolve, much as they did between World War I and World War II, and then in a lot of the conflicts, between World War II and kind of the Gulf War and the roles they served. So I think it'll certainly still be a factor. I think there's a tremendous amount of capability it brings that's hard to replicate in the aggregate. But I do think from a defense perspective, from a counter UAS perspective, there's many things a big target like that needs to think through in a world where there's large numbers of UAS.
Nice. You did in the aggregate, like
Moneyball.
Actually, pull up the Pat Blumenthal Twitter. Do you know Pat Blumenthal? Have you ever met him?
I don't know if I do.
He's an investor.
Okay.
He should invest in Darkhive. He's an investor in ACS.
Okay.
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we need to replace it in the aggregate. I mean, guy's a genius. We're headed out to, it's his birthday next weekend. So.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, he's hilarious. He lives in LA. Yeah. He's raising his new fund now. He's invested in us out of his last fund.
Oh, but, perfect.
I'm pretty bullish on him. I think he's got a good angle. He gets on the front lines, he goes out to the actual the front to see what the technology is out there. He's trying to get a full picture, because it's tough to read the news and really get a full understanding of what's going on. I mean, there's only so much OSINT data you can get. What do you read to find out about what's going on in Ukraine? Yeah,
so I really like War on the Rocks. They've got the Russia contingency, a separate kind of podcast product they put together off of that. I think a lot of the kind of either whether it's in the literal Telegram channel or it's versions of that you're seeing in other places, I think the kind of real-time reporting is super powerful. And then I think a lot of the folks that were involved with the EUCOM mission sets, General Retired Hodges and others and folks like that have a good understanding of the operational complexities, the realities, and what that high-intensity conflict looks like with a threat like Russia. So I think, from the literal, like the Telegram channel to the more kind of distilled, a lot of smart folks think about it in War on the Rocks, and then other folks that have been in those positions that have thought about the EUCOM problem set, let's say. I try to read a lot and learn from folks a lot smarter than myself and, piece together an understanding.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the new SecDef?
As a serving reservist, I'm not going to get into specific comments on my future chain of command, but excited to see, new administration clearly coming in with a lot of energy, a lot of clear thoughts around what it means to build in America, what it means to have a credible capability, what it means to have a peace through strength and things of that nature. So excited to see folks get into their positions and what they do.
What's next for Darkhive in 2025?
So 2025, a couple of things I think on our product side. So we have hardware products. We've talked about the Obelisk and the Yellow Jacket, kind of a smaller UAS. We've also got two software products, Red Queen, which is a voice user interface for the ATAC ecosystem. So basically Siri for ATAC. So
well, hold on. Let's talk about that. Seems like Red Queen.
Yeah.
Okay. Voice interface.
Yes.
For ATAC. Seems like a departure from the ISR mission. Why a multi-product company?
No, sure. Great question. So the way I would look at it is departure from ISR maybe, but it's in that autonomous teaming bucket where as many other defense companies have seen, as you get in with folks, as you build rapport, as you have them test and field your capability and give you feedback, you uncover other pain points, right? And this one came from the Arctic operating environment, some of our Air Force partners there, where TAC is great. The fact that I have it all on a small EUD end user device is fantastic, but it's 20 below. I've got to pull off my gloves and then try to awkwardly touch small buttons to make things happen in the mission command platform. And what Red Queen allows you to do is with the headset you have on, your Peltors, your Invisio, interface with TAC the way you would use Siri or Alexa or any of the other kind of leading edge commercial voice user interface products. And that's really the genesis of the idea. It's built obviously directly integrated into TAC, and that's what it allows you to do. And being someone that used to ride around in the back of a Stryker and a Bradley and other Army vehicles, like that's the touching of the screen is just always the bane of your existence, let alone if you're dismounted, let alone if it's cold out, let alone if you're task saturated and there's other things going on around you and you can't afford to be heads down, lose all situational awareness, touching things.
This sounds pretty cool. So is it like, are you guys like prototyping with them now? Are you kind of working with a partner? Are you just like, where's the stage of this?
Yeah, so one of the kind of main pillars of the philosophy is kind of open to government software rather than like the closed, heavily licensed software world. Taking a page out of the TAC playbook and where that came from. So it's live in a beta on TAC.gov today. If you're an accredited government user, you can go on there, download it, and use it for your purposes. And it's very much open to government software as it exists today.
So it's like kind of like an open source play.
There's an
open government source, really.
Open to government GOTS type of software, but there are other folks that, hey, this is great from baseline capability. Can you train it in an even more refined way? Can you attune it even more closely to my specific use case or add on additional functionality? And obviously there's a commercial opportunity there, but that's an opportunity to continue to build it out for government.
Is this like a new business model kind of where you can like give them some free software and then they can add features, and then they pay for that, or is this?
So I'll speak in terms of what Palantir and some others have done, where it's exactly that, where there are some products that are licensed in that they've built. There's others, other companies have that are more open. But one thing Palantir and others have kind of innovated on, developed, is this managed software support model, where you go out and, because it's open to government, if they want to host it, if they want to run it, if they want to maintain it on their own, they can do all that. If there is an appetite for, hey, I want someone else to go and do that, then the company that developed the software as close to it is, pretty clearly well positioned to be able to do that extremely well for that customer. So I think we're a believer in that, where it's not for every vehicle, let's have a large license fee, or let's make it closed, let's make it not integrated with other solutions. Let's make it very open and accessible. And then if there's an opportunity to either build it out for a certain use case or for kind of managed support over time, obviously happy to help support in that way.
That makes sense. Okay, so kind of then Darkhive is going a little more horizontal with the product suite then, right?
So it's a common you're a drone company. That's why I always try to get folks on the autonomous teaming kind of concept. And a part of that is the software ecosystem. So the idea of an autonomous teammate is great. The hardware being able to execute on its own and have its own intelligence is great. But if you don't have the connectivity and the software back.
Well, I think that makes sense. I'm actually not knocking it. I'm just trying to understand it. But basically, like, other ISR platforms could then work with this.
If it's integrated into TAC, which more and more systems are, then yes, it's like the user interfacing with TAC is that voice UI piece, and then anything else on the back end. It may take some NRE, it may take some work, may take some integration, but that's the connectivity we're trying to build. And the other platform, to your point around horizontal and multiple lines we've been building on the software side, is a product called FleetForge, which is a fleet management and developer security operations, DevSecOps. A lot of words. Basically, it's a platform, it's a dashboard where you can see all of your systems, you can understand where they are, you can understand their health, their status, the number of cycles they've run, et cetera. And also critically, you can push software out to that edge system, leveraging an ATO and authority to operate.
This meant to be used in like a command center away from the battlefield, or where would they use this dashboard? So
yeah, this is very much the company, the troop, the squadron that has many different types of manufacturer and platform agnostic edge systems, autonomous systems. And it's a way for them to have one software platform where they can push updates out to those systems when they're needed, whether it's firmware, whether it's a comms update, or one use case we're seeing a lot of is everyone talks about modular MOSA, modular open, et cetera. What if I have an autonomous system with a modular payload, right? Like the Obelisk. And instead of having an ISR capability, I want to have a comms capability on there. Well, when you do that, how do you get the right software out to the Obelisk and to that sensor itself, that it's integrated, it's got the right updates, there's changes, there's updates based on.
So you're building like a way for them to easily update different devices.
You can push the updates you need for that modular sensor out to the edge system over accredited software rails.
This is so I come from a B2B SaaS world before this, like we used to do restaurant tech. So we'd have like screens in the kitchen. We'd have point of sale systems, and we needed to push updates. So we had like a managed device company we use. Like we put this like application on every device in the restaurants so that we could like push updates. Is that it's kind of like that? Like it's you're like kind of doing device management?
I'd look at it a little bit differently than device management. It's there's a fleet management piece where it's helpful in and of itself to have that dashboard and know. Today, the reality is a lot of folks don't know where their systems are. They don't know the status. They don't know what software is on them, let alone how many cycles a certain system has run, how many times it's flown. So there's a lot of value there. And then it's also okay, great, we operate in a government world. There's this ATO, the authority to operate question of, does a software product have that? Is it accredited? Has it gone through the right checks? And this is a way to get the right software out to that system with accredited rails doing it the right way versus just someone runs out with a thumb drive, hooks it up to the drone and uploads some software.
Yeah. So we have, for Bullfrog, there's a couple of like neural networks, for the detection, classification of the drones and stuff. And as we update the threat model, we retrain the model. That's a new neural net.
100%.
It's about 300 megabytes. And it's how do we update all the Bullfrogs out there with this new neural net? And, we're going through that now. Like we're, building a pipeline for that. But are you saying that this is something that we would use potentially? Like we would send it through your platform?
Conceptually, yes. I mean, not to turn this into a sales discovery
conversation. No, I'm just curious. Yeah.
Conceptually, I think that's exactly the idea. That today it's we built it we had our own need. We realized a lot of the government end users we talked to had this pain point, but there are probably other types of systems other than just autonomous systems that can leverage this because it's this fleet software platform that allows you to get the right software to the edge where it's needed.
That makes sense. No, I think that regardless of whether it's drones or gun turrets or any of these new type of autonomous systems out there, they're going to need updates, continuous updates. Thumb drives aren't as useful, or they're a little harder to do. Like, for example, in the Navy nuclear program, obviously it's still mostly thumb drives and stuff. You don't connect to the electronics in the reactor compartment to the network really. So like it's still kind of manual there.
I'm picturing like old school, like actual floppy disks. Like
no, not quite that, but we usually isolate the RC INC from the rest of the rest of the ship. There's like on a carrier, there's like a bunch of different networks. There's obviously like the network that the sailors use to like get on the internet, and that's like supposed to be isolated from the reactor compartment.
Probably for a good reason.
Yeah. I mean, we spent a lot of time making sure it was isolated, that kind of thing, because obviously cybersecurity risks and stuff. But no, I see that this is a common theme I've been noticing as well, like talking to the customer, of just like, how are we going to keep these devices in the field updated?
100%. And it's that push towards more modular, more open systems. That's great. But to your point, how do you keep them updated? And how do you get them on almost like the software common operating picture where they're all speaking the same language and they all can work together? Yeah.
So that's 2025 is looking bright.
Looking good. So those are kind of the products. I still didn't get to your question of 2025. So bringing a few of those to market, and also kind of as a company focusing on a lot of the end users we've engaged with, a lot of the government users where we meet their pain point, going from the concept to the demonstration of the capability to a more integrated, whether it's fielding, whether it's a pilot, whether it's participating in these large multinational exercises, getting out there and showing the capability, not just from to our discussion earlier, an RDT&E perspective, but okay, I'm going to do and train on a certain mission set. I want to achieve a certain effect on the battlefield. How do I leverage this autonomous teaming capability to go and do it? Versus okay, this is a tech demo, cool, it flies, I see some imagery, but it's just a kind of a graduation of the level of integration and support, and pilot programs and fielding ultimately is a big part of that.
Do you do your own like private demos instead of going to these public ones? How do you guys think about that, like as a company?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I saw you guys had put together an event recently where you demoed, maybe competed with a little bit a UAS platform.
I basically have decided that the private demos are where I'm at now, because it's so expensive to take everyone to these events. And I love the government for putting them all on. Like, there's a lot of them. As you know, there's a lot of them. And next year we get invited to like 7 of them. And I'm like looking at the cost of like sending everyone to all of these. And I'm like, oh man, what if we just have our own?
Yeah.
And so like a lot of it's just cost savings. And then the other thing I've noticed is a lot of the customers kind of like to come to Austin. So it's like it's an excuse for them to travel. They have to come see a gun turret shoot some drones. And we save like $50,000 or something, It's crazy.
No, I think it's a really smart play. And we've done some of that with our testing and experimentation events, our integration events, where we show not just one product, but multiple working together. And to your point, it's we've organized them ourselves. We invite folks from government end users, government customers, other stakeholders in our ecosystem. And it's a really great way to kind of show your capability and have those more kind of maybe one-on-one, honest, frank conversations that are tougher to do at a T-Rex.
We all don't have Trae Stevens money, bro. Like, we can't just like be going buying entire test facilities. Didn't he like buy 8 Mile or something? I thought they bought it.
I mean, there's that. And then I don't know if you guys were I think I saw your team at a T-Rex over the summer in Indiana. I don't know if you guys were at AUSA, but every time I go to that event or ones like it, I cannot get over the booths and the cost and the teams.
Oh my God. No, we didn't get a booth. Well, first of all, the booths are like impossible to get because like maybe we're in a defense tech bubble or something. It's impossible.
Yeah.
I tried to pay them. I was like, I'll give you, I told the AUSA people, I was on the phone with them and I was like, I will give you $100,000 for a booth. I was like, kick someone else out. And they were like, there's no amount of money you can give us. And I was like, this is such bullshit.
And that's not going to cut it, I don't think. That's going to be the 8x8 in the corner.
No, I was like, I'll take anything. Yeah. And so we ended up just getting Jack set up a coffee cart. We sponsored the coffee outside of the building.
That's smart.
Like, that's all we had. And
that's really smart.
Next year, what I'm going to try to do is the coffee carts again.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to like get into someone else's booth.
Yep.
Like Nobles is one of our, Nobles does our ammo boxes. So like I noticed the Nobles, they had a huge booth.
Yeah.
Because their business is sweet. And they had a bunch of startups in there. So I'm hoping maybe we can just like piggyback next year.
So I really love your idea with the coffee cart.
Yeah, coffee cart.
We've said the same thing internally with the taco truck. And like the couple of the startup podcast folks talk about exactly that like, hey, listen, we're not going to go to this big conference and spend 6 figures on a booth, but we'll have a taco truck outside and like give away some hats. And I think that's really smart and scrappy.
Yeah, did you do Soft Week or did you guys?
I wasn't part of the team yet, but yeah, John and the team were down there in Tampa.
So for Soft Week, we sponsored the food trucks.
There you go.
So we're always like, doing the outskirts, like on the edges, you know.
That's the second time founder playbook. Like you've made the mistakes before, you know, hey, spend the $2,000 on the taco truck, not the $200,000 on the booth.
Yeah, we used to do because in restaurant tech, it's a big trade. The way you sell in restaurant tech is trade shows.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little different in government tech. I think there's still trade shows are important, but restaurant tech, restaurant owners, they're not online. Like they're just they don't go online.
Yeah.
The only time they go online is to like go on their like ex-wife's Facebook page. Yeah, that's a joke. No, just kidding. I love you guys. Any other? There's a lot of restaurant people that listen to this because they know you. So that's just a joke for them.
Yeah.
I'm going to one of their one of the big restaurant tech Christmas parties in New York.
Oh, amazing!
In like December 10th or something. So they'll see this and they'll give me shit. They'll be like,
how dare you say that?
How dare you say that's the only reason I go on internet. So I learned from this that they buy. That's how they buy. They buy in person and they buy at these trade shows.
Yeah.
But really where they buy is like the after parties.
Yep.
You know, so
100%.
we would try to invest mostly in like that. And I think it's, you know, it's different in government a little because you can't directly like just pay, like do big parties.
Yeah.
Like for example, when I was before restaurant tech, I was in marketing and sales automation. So I worked at a company called Marketo.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the Salesforce app ecosystem. And like, you know, the way they sell in those industries is they just like rent out entire suites at the Giants stadium.
Sure.
And they just like bring everyone there.
Sure.
That's not something you can do in defense tech or any sort of government tech. So like there's just different things you need to do in this industry, but it's still a ground game. Like you still have to get in front of these, as you mentioned earlier,
100%.
you still got to get in front of them. But really, instead of going to like cool Giants games, you have to go to like Lawton, Oklahoma, and you go to like the base.
That's Fort Sill. Yeah, I spent two different stints of 6 months apiece at Fort Sill. Love the area. But you're exactly right. Like next week, right, we're going out to UCOM, engaging with a bunch of end
That's what I'm
users
saying.
there.
Like, that's the game here.
It's
the game.
And I mean, and this is out of the you know, like the West Coast, like YC scrappy startup playbook to our earlier discussion of, hey, I'm going to happen to be in town. Would love to talk to you about what we're building. You'd be surprised how many folks, like, you usually probably aren't going to be in town, but you'll buy the plane ticket if they say yes. And that's a great way to start the conversation. And we've had a number of those where folks say, I didn't know this existed. It may not be a right fit, but that's an opportunity for us to learn, hey, what are your pain points? Does this fit? How could it be better? How could it be different to fit those more acutely? And it's just a great way to kind of expand the surface area of folks you're talking to and are aware of your capability. So I think it's exactly that type of scrappiness is spot on. And there's the kind of famous example also from the West Coast school of, you know, Brex in the early days when they were in YC. They just sent every other YC company or companies local in the area a bottle of champagne and say, hey, this is who we are. We do credit cards for startups. And that's cost them, you know, $200 a bottle or whatever it was, but it's not the $500K on a booth at a big event. So I love that.
One of the favorite things I heard about Darkhive today is that it's in San Antonio, which it's like one of the only startups that I know down there now. And I feel like that's really good from a recruiting standpoint because you can basically grab people that are in that city and you're not like competing with like the LA like scene basically.
Yeah, I think it's you know, a lot of folks love living in Texas. It's kind of stating the obvious, but like it's a great place to build a company. And there's Austin, Dallas, and other places. But I think, you know, John and Steve were in the area, and it's a great city. There's a lot of great local talent. And to your point, it's also, I want to live in Texas. I may not want to compete in the, you know, north of Austin real estate market. So I can be very close down the road in San Antonio, great city. Wemby on the Spurs, bringing a lot of excitement back to the fan base. It's a great place to build a company, and you know, I know the team's been very happy there. So I think it's a good call.
What's the town between Austin and San Antonio? New Braunfels?
New Braunfels, yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
See, I got my geography.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. No prep, but you know specific places in Texas ahead of time.
I'm a natural podcast host. I have to be able to span any topic. From Ryan Gosling in the Ides of March to talking about ISR platforms on the front lines. You know, it's 100%. Part of the game. It's part of the. We're wrapping up here soon, but I guess a couple other things. Because I didn't check.
Yeah.
Who are some of the early investors in the company?
Capital Factory out of the Austin ecosystem. And then Crosslink and 1011 joining.
Crosslink?
Yeah.
That's a VC, right?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, I know them.
And then 1011 joining in the A. So RTX Ventures as well. A lot of great folks on the cap table.
Crosslink was almost the Bbot Series A lead.
There you go.
I really liked the Crosslink team. I went with CRV instead, but Crosslink was an amazing firm. So that's really great backers. It's awesome. So what Capital Factory, that's interesting. They keep emailing me. Haven't met with them yet. I didn't know they were actually doing like investments. I thought they were office space. I didn't actually know what do they do?
So they do have a great office space down in Austin. They're well connected with Army Futures and those folks down there. They're a bit of one of those like ecosystem nodes, like Mass Challenge is another example, probably that's a similar model where it's part connectivity, it's part kind of coaching and mentoring and helping you understand the contours of the landscape of selling to government. But from what I understand, they also do run a fund, they make investments, and they just have a great understanding of, if you're excited, you want to build in defense and you want to figure out how to sell to government, they're great partners to have and folks that understand how to do that well. And to your point, yes, they do have that office space in Austin. That's they host a lot of events there. Fed Supernova, I know, is tied in there.
Cool. How would you assess the T levels of your founders?
The T levels of our founders.
They high T guys?
High energy, high output, very driven.
This is a joke, by the way, internally in our signal, like my sales team signal.
Yep.
Is like the T levels of our sales team. And we actually want to build an index of like startups and their founders' T levels and their valuations and see where it nets out.
Fascinating. I'd be interested to see. It's one of those over time, right? Where like as they're raising, as their markups, where does it land out? But then as it comes to exiting and actually realizing that value, where does it shake out?
Yeah, what's that? Is there a study on this? Didn't they do a study?
There was like a tweet.
Here, no, there was it was like I think Pat Blumenthal actually has if you go past the Moneyball one, I think he did post we'll have to pull this up. But while he's looking for it, my goal, I was joking yesterday in our company signal chat. I was like, my goal is to build a unicorn company with the lowest T level. Like, think about that. If you're like the guy, like you have like a multi-billion-dollar company, you have the lowest T level of any other CEO. That's the game.
Interesting.
You gotta be a real sociopath. All right, here it is. Age normalized testosterone peaks at Series B for male startup founders. Yeah. So basically,
this is fascinating.
First of all, this study's got to be complete bullshit.
There's no way like this is an academic, peer-reviewed actual study.
55% from pre-seed to seed funding, peaking at Series B stage, where levels were 99.6% higher than pre-seed. It peaks though. After Series B, testosterone was observed to drop by 42.2%. That is great. I wonder what even compelled them to. I mean, this has to be a joke, total joke.
Yeah, I don't know. I have doubts that this is a joke would make more sense than this being a real study someone funded and ran. You know.
Yeah. So now what we want to do is build a full index of defense tech T levels of the founding teams.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, not that people need more like market maps or frameworks, but you could do another one on like the 2x2 of like, do you wear a Hawaiian shirt or not? And then like your T level, and there's kind of all ways you can slice this. Very interesting.
This is the important stuff we talk about on the podcast. Okay. These are the things that are necessary. All right, Mike, it was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Where are you headed now?
Headed to a couple of meetings in town here in DC today, and then back up to Boston, and then getting on a plane over to Europe this weekend.
How often would you say you like kind of travel?
Pretty frequently.
Because in Boston, there's not too much, but you're on the road as this, you're the front face,
I need to be on the road anyway, so it matters less where I am. I'm probably on the road 2-3 weeks a month, talking to partners, end users, customers, etc.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the Darkhive founders are really glad to have you. I mean, you're immense for them because they're probably back in the shop building a lot, right?
I mean, I'm glad to be on the team. They've laid a great framework, and it seems to be working so far. I haven't been fired yet, so knock on wood. Hopefully that continues.
No, hell yeah, you're doing great. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
That's right, yeah.